Welcome to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast. Well, thanks for joining us on the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast today. We are joined by Adam White and Andrée Davies of Davies White Limited. They create playful, biodiverse landscapes, and we're going to be chatting about their nature-based biophilic approach to designing playgrounds, including their new project where they have created a micro forest playground in West London. We're also going to be talking about resilient landscaping because, as we were discussing earlier just now, they are landscape architects, not gardeners. They are landscape architects, which they're going to tell us about in a minute. But so we're going to be talking about that, but also what housing developments need to be including and how they need to be doing it. And as part of this, we're going to be chatting about emotional response, climate change, methodology, and of course, pure joy. They're speaking at the Biophilic Design Conference, so please come along to that, biophilicdesignconference.com. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Vanessa. Thanks for having us both joining you today. We've listened to your podcast and we're really excited to be here. This is actually our first ever podcast. We've been invited to a few, but you are the first we've attended together, which is really exciting.
That's lovely. Well, thank you for joining us. I want to know a little bit about what you do, please, in a nutshell.
Hi, Vanessa. Yeah. So we are chartered landscape architects. That's our official professional title. And sometimes we have to describe a little bit about what that is because people have an idea that we might do one thing and really we do something else. So we're designers and project managers. And what we do is try and improve the spaces between buildings. So somebody once described it as any space with sky above. And that is, that's a lot of spaces, anything from forestry to roads and roundabouts, hospitals, schools. Adam and I have been working together. I've been a landscape architect for 30 years. Adam and I have had our practice for 20 years. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year, aren't we, Adam?
We are, yes. And we first met working for the environmental charity Groundwork, which is an organisation doing some incredible work across the UK in some of the most deprived communities, because not everybody is lucky enough to have a garden. So that's why green spaces are so vital and important. And COVID really highlighted how important green spaces are. So for Andrée and I, we love the fact we don't really know who the end user is going to be. And we're designing and engaging in that design process to create these fantastic, biodiverse, nature-friendly green spaces all across the UK, from the shores of Loch Lomond to the coast of Southampton and over in Northern Ireland and Wales as well.
Wow, amazing. And I'm going to just encourage people. I'm going to put a link to your website because it's really beautiful, actually. There's some lovely places there and it's just really, really inspiring. But talking about inspiring, what got you interested in landscape architecture and nature? What was that sort of initial driver to get your hands dirty in the mud? Or maybe it wasn't getting dirty in the mud. Maybe it was more observational.
Well, for me, I was fascinated by seeing a seed germinate and grow as a child. And I still am now. I can't quite get my head around the fact all that information is inside an acorn that can turn into a mighty oak tree. I find it fascinating. And as a child, I used to collect old margarine tubs, grow cress and mustard on a bit of kitchen paper, and then sell them at the end of the road to all the people in our community. So that was the real fascination with the living world. And then about 14 years old, I loved fishing. I used to go fishing with my granddad, and the village pond was all overgrown. I grew up in Cheshire, and I got a group of people from the village to come together to create a new asset in the village. So we cleaned it out. We put a little walkway around it, fishing platforms, and I designed it and made a model. And I was 14 years old, and little did I know that was my first landscape architecture project. And really, I went from there into finding and there was actually a profession called landscape architecture I could study. So I was really, really from a very young age.
Wow, amazing.
I had friends that I used to go and see after school, and we would, this was the 1970s, so we were sort of shoved outside. You'd disappear, just go and fill your time and come back in time for tea. So we used to go into the woods behind their house and collect anything and everything from leaves, sticks, dead animals, mice, that sort of thing. And we would collect all of these things in our bedroom. So my bedroom was full of little mouse skulls or berries, strange, weird and wonderful animal poo, because you could then find out, what, for example, owls. It's such a great way to find out what owls have eaten. So yeah, our bedrooms would be like these kind of, like a lab or a kind of cabinet of curiosities, the most strangest things. And my parents would come in and clear it all away and say, you can't have all this, all this stuff in your bedroom. I'm like, these are my precious things. But as well as collecting all of these things, which I've found so fascinating, I used to draw them. So drawing has been part of the other kind of side of me. So I've got science and art together. And I think that is what landscape architecture as a profession, it has such a unique ability to bring those two things together. So as much as I love nature and all the incredible things that it offered and still does, and I still get all of that enjoyment from being close to nature, the design side is now fueled by my love of drawing, of designing, of how things look, how you make spaces that feel beautiful, joyful. I love the fact that you talked about joy, because this idea of, and being outside and just feeling nature running through you, knowing you're part of it, feeling joyful because of that. We have to remind ourselves that that is still available to us, but we ignore it. And one of the things we try and do is reconnect people with being outside, with that joy of being connected to nature.
Hang on a minute, can I just add here? Andrée used to wake her parents up at 6 o'clock in the morning and say, can we go for a nature walk? And they'd be like, go back to bed.
And they'd say, no, we cannot. I went anyway.
Yeah.
And Andrée would take a sketch pad with her as a young girl there on the nature walk, sketching and drawing when she was out and about.
Yeah.
And that hasn't changed. That's still happening.
Do you know what? I still do that. So I keep a journal. I'm a kind of journaling kind of person because I find it really therapeutic. So this morning at 6:30, I live on Dartmoor now. 6:30, I walk around the valley where we are, which has got the most incredible collection of mosses and lichens. So this morning I've got sticks on my mantelpiece over here covered in lichen, and I'm just drinking my cup of tea and drawing lichen. And it's something inside of me that I need, but I think a lot of people need it and they ignore it. So that's why we're so excited about talking to you, and how these things really, we need to put these things back on top of our priority list, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's what I mean, just pulling on those two of those things really, talking about joy, but you talk about creating these like playscapes in the work you do, but you also talk about equity. You talk about creating spaces for kids and people as well that can't have access to it. And just listening to you both, and then Andrée, you saying you need this in your life. Most people who are maybe living in cities, they are disconnected because they don't have access to it. And for me, that's why I was so keen to interview you both, to inspire people who are listening to find out how they can design better, and why it's really important, these to inspire children's confidence, for instance, their development, their imagination, and then obviously why nature connected biophilic design is really important in schools, for instance, as well, and that development in younger children.
Yeah, well, a couple of years ago, I was president of the Landscape Institute. This is the professional body in the UK for landscape architects and landscape professionals. And I was fortunate enough to get to know Sir David Attenborough. And in one of the conversations with him, he said to me, if children don't understand nature, they won't appreciate it. And if they don't appreciate it, they won't protect it. And if they don't protect it, who will? And I was like, there you go. He's so good, isn't he? He says, he just absolutely nailed it. And I've got goosebumps now, remembering him leaning in and telling me that at a dinner we were together. And that led to my role as president, and along with Andrée and a number of other people within our profession, to create and launch a career campaign called #ChooseLandscape, hopefully to inspire the next generation to choose landscape. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean in our profession, it might, whatever job they go into, whatever career they have, is to think, how can I choose landscape? They might go into finance or they might go into law, but how do they choose landscape? How do they put it first? How do they try and educate other people around them and the benefits of time in nature? And then earlier this year, the great news, and we've been lobbying for a number of years, along with Sir David Attenborough and Chris Packham, was the natural history GCSE, and it starts in September in schools. And I know for a fact Andrée and I would have chosen that. Would that have been one of the options? And I think hopefully going forwards, there'll be an A level in natural history. And that's how you can take those climate strike children in schools. It gives them something tangible to focus that energy into and make a difference as they grow up. So, schools are so important. And with that natural history GCSE, they'll need a classroom for it, and no better place than the space outside the classroom.
I love that. I love that. And I've interviewed Mary Colwell, the curlew lady.
Yeah.
And she spoke about that natural history GCSE, and I didn't know what stage you were at. So it's actually going to start.
Yeah, it starts to be launched this year. Yeah.
So exciting. That's so
Really
exciting.
great it is.
Absolutely brilliant. So when you've created these spaces, how do you stimulate play among the children? I mean, what's some of the sort of activations that you create in these landscapes?
I think the thing about playgrounds is that they're, in urban areas, there's usually some space. It isn't always very big. But as we know, a lot of playgrounds are tarmacked over, and that's because it's easy to look after them. There's a kind of we're left with a lot of Victorian schools actually that had a yard, and now that's the space that a lot of these children get to play in. So whenever we get the opportunity to work with schools, which we love to do, one of the things we are thinking is, how can we make the space greener? How can we introduce plants essentially into these very, very built hard environments? And when you've got a limited budget, the ideal would be to take up the tarmac and, build a forest outside, which we'll come on to because we are doing that with one school. But most schools, they have a limited budget. So, we're always thinking about how can we help schools introduce nature, grow more plants, and do it in a way that's really practical and achievable for them. Because if we start to, say you need millions of pounds to do this, it's very off-putting for a lot of schools. And that's out of our reach. So we do a lot of things with raised planting containers, for example. You can grow trees in raised planting containers. Making smaller spaces out of one big space is a way of introducing little corners where children can sit together, perhaps have a conversation. You generally get quite a lot of noise and activity outside during playground. And for some children, that can be very overwhelming. So we create little spaces, corners, little nooks, perhaps, where children can gather together and have a quiet time outside. And one of the ways we've been doing this is through something that we call a willow pod. So that's a growing, living, woven willow egg shape that you can actually climb inside. And when you go inside, you feel how much cooler it is. It's shady, and you're surrounded by nature, and you feel a lot better. And we work with a Scottish artist, and he will weave these eggs for us, and they grow in a container, so it can just be lifted into the school, and they can use that as a way of bringing more green trees and plants into the garden. And then, we're really about making a space where children can use their imagination, because it's all inside children. It's all there, all these wonderful love of nature and the connection to nature, but it just needs to be opened up to them. And filling your playground with plants and trees is one of the best ways of doing that.
Absolutely, yeah. Just as you were talking now, I was thinking, is there a way of bringing these spaces into other environments? Can we learn? I mean, as a society, we've really shut ourselves off from nature. Can we bring it into healthcare? Where there's families, old and young, desperate for some respite, some quiet space, some play space as well, just to kind of be free in too. I mean, nature holds us as well, but I mean, how would you see that working?
Well, I mean, one of the exercises we do, so we do a lot of stakeholder engagement to foster ownership of a project, and we promote cross-generational play. So it's not about just designing for the children. One of the biggest compliments we get is when there's parents and grandparents and carers say, can we go into that nature garden or that nature play space? We've tapped into that, and I think that's really important. And when we're running our workshops, we do our mind reading trick, and we can do it with your listeners now. So what we're going to do is ask everybody to close their eyes for just 10 seconds and imagine where they enjoyed playing as a child. Okay, and Andrée and I are reading everybody's minds. Wow. Now the chances are it wasn't on a springy chicken. It was probably climbing in a tree, building a dam in a stream, making a snowman, exploring a beach, or maybe constructing a treehouse with your friends. So our question is, why as adults, when we think of play, do we default to what we call KFC playgrounds? Kit, fence and carpet. Kit surrounded by lots of metal fencing and the rubber carpet everywhere. Why are we providing that when our memory of quality play is not that? So we continue, and we thought we'd sorted it out. In 2007, Andrée and I created a garden at Hampton Court called Playscape. It went on to be reimagined in Hanwell in a pocket park, and it was a real game changer in the UK. And we thought everybody had listened and stepped up. Play England got involved. They applied. £235 million was secured to be invested in nature play spaces across the UK, using that project as one of the case study examples. And we thought, wow, we've cracked that nut. We've done it. And slowly over the years, the default goes back to the battery-reared springy chickens, resulting in our battery-reared children. So what we're trying to do is say, how do we bring that imagination back in? And we have to constantly reinvent the wheel and do our mind reading trick just to remind everybody, particularly the decision makers, the funders, the policy makers, they're the real ones. There's an appetite in society for nature play, but definitely the people that set the briefs and allocate the funding will often default back to KFC playgrounds, unfortunately.
I think that's very particular, isn't it? When we work, we've done some projects with the NHS actually, trying to bring playful nature spaces right up into close to children's wards in hospitals. And one of the things we find is, the funding for the NHS gets all goes into clinical work, obviously. So it's quite difficult to fund the development of outdoor spaces. Hospitals are built in an interesting way. They quite often have these kind of courtyard spaces within the buildings. So there is the opportunity to look into these spaces, but there's so much opportunity there to do something better. And quite often at the hospital close to me, those interior spaces they've just got gravel in them and a couple of benches if you're lucky. But we know, the research tells us how important those spaces are to people's recovery. And obviously that's no better than in a hospital setting. So we did a project in, Adam will probably remember the date, I can never remember the date, in St George's Hospital in London. And that was connected to a children's ward. So the idea being that when a child is going to a hospital, it's quite an intimidating experience and quite frightening. So we made this garden that was full of plants and trees, and it was very playful. It had a little water pump and a swing and some pet rabbits as well. So things that were helping that child to feel less anxious about going into a hospital environment. And their children could go out there before their appointment, or if they were in the hospital for treatment, they could come out if someone could spend some time with them. Having animals is a really interesting part of these spaces outdoors, because the sort of connection to another living being is very, brings the heart rate down and helps us to relax.
I've got a question for Andrée. Can you remember the name of the rabbits?
I think they were named after members of the band Take That.
They were
Howard
and Jason. Howard and Jason. So the project was part funded by the Take That Foundation. So it's delivered in partnership with those guys, and Mark Owen came down and got involved in the willow weaving as part of the opening. So there was two characters carved by a local tree carver, and he created Mark Owen and Gary. And then there was a robin that came throughout the project, sat on the fence, came in the garden and left, wasn't there all the time. So the contractors called him Robbie. So it worked quite well. And you're absolutely right. And Andrée and I talk about a thing called plant blindness. And this is society's thing where we'll walk past plants, but we'll stop and look at a bumblebee, a butterfly, a squirrel, a rabbit called Howard or Jason. But will we stop and look at the plants that support them, that are a part of their environment? Quite often we don't. So what we try and do is introduce our playful planting, this layer, to try and get people to stop and pause and appreciate them. And we designed a project called Hobble Down Children's Farm. Anybody that lives in the Surrey area might know it. It's near Epsom. And that was a fascinating project for us, wasn't it, Andrée? Where we weren't just accommodating children and parents and carers and grandparents. We were accommodating, well, goodness knows, all sorts: rabbits, meerkats, llamas, you name it. Interesting project, wasn't it?
That sounds really great. Obviously, biophilic design is about all life, so I absolutely love that. I love the fact that, and it's not just plant in the corner, which I think historically it's been that. I think people are learning that it's much more, and when people grasp it, it's such a rich seam of opportunity. I think if we apply the biophilia hypothesis to everything we do, really the decisions we make and the spaces we design, which is totally, your raison d'etre, really. And just when you were talking there earlier as well, it's the thing that's intuitive, isn't it? This connection to nature. We just feel happier. Like you were saying, when you close your eyes and you remember, a time that makes you happy, or even now, where do we want to go away on holiday? We don't think of putting ourselves in an office. We're thinking of being outside, with a beautiful view. I did want to ask you. Obviously, I mentioned in the opening gambit that we were going to be talking about the micro forest that you're doing. And for me, this is almost like nature on speed. Could you tell us a little bit about the project and what it is, and what maybe, I mean, people might know what a micro forest is, but what that habitat looks like, and can be replicated even. So
this is a project we're doing with Villiers School in Southall in West London. And we've been working with them for about two years, I think. So quite often there's a lot of thinking time before anything is actually done on the ground. And we're always making sure that what we're designing is really fitting the client group that we are working with. So in that instance, like Adam was saying, we do a lot of engagement with the children. And we went in and we ran a workshop helping a group of children from the school to articulate what it is they like about being outside, and helping them to kind of raise the aspiration of what the outdoors could do for them. So they came up, they were all ages actually. It's an academy school. So I think the youngest was probably about 10, and then they were up to 15. So that was so interesting, seeing how they started to have conversations between them about, okay, we've got this opportunity to influence what happens in our new playground. And the reason we had this opportunity is because they're building a new building. So the school is expanding and they're putting a new building in. And the head teacher and the school staff group are really forward thinking. And they came to us and said, come on, we know we need this new building, but what can we do with our outdoor environment that is as inspiring to our children for learning? So we spent a day with the children there. We walked around the school grounds as they are at the moment. There are some really great existing trees there. And then we do this exercise called mood boarding. It's kind of finding images that are, you feel connected to in some way. They resonate with you. You look at them and think, I'd love to be in that place. or something that you think, as kids, it's very often about challenging, climbing, getting up high, all of those kind of activities, building a tree house perhaps, or a platform that's high up. So we did this exercise with this group of children. We came up with these mood boards that kind of set the tone for what we were going to do outside. And then from that, what we and Adam do, we draw out these principles of what we want this space outside to do. And often that's about, it's got to be welcoming and joyful. It's got to be available to everybody. So this thing about how you make it feel welcoming and accessible to everyone is very important. We often tap into local history or the history of the site, and this is all part of making a space that really fits the site we're working on. And then it's got to suit the community we're working with. And in this case, that's the school community, the whole school community, parents, and local people living in the area. So we came out of that day with the principles and ideas about what we were going to do. And everything was kind of coming back to, we want trees because we want shade. And these, because it's a school environment, they're learning a lot about how important trees are and how they can be. So the teaching group were very keen for us to provide spaces outside where they can take the classroom outside and teach outside. And that's such a useful way of helping children just understand and feel more relaxed about learning, and getting outside, sitting in nature can be a better space to learn in than sitting in a classroom. We tend to sort of put all of our children in one box, this is how you learn, but a lot of them don't learn very well in traditional classrooms. So if you can take the learning outside, that really helps the group of children who feel more relaxed outside, and they learn better. So that's how we kind of set the scene for what we were going to do. It was going to be this forest. Now, a forest can be any size, and there was, with the existing trees, there was a playing field. So we designed this micro forest. I mean, it's micro because it's small, but the other thing is we are planting trees quite close together. So normally when we do a public realm scheme, we might put trees, we sort of work to centres of 4 meters, for example. But in this instance, we want to cram in as many trees as we can. So we will be planting them very densely. And the way you manage that is that trees, to start with, they grow up because they're starting to reach for the light. And then after year 1, year 2, year 3, you manage them in different ways, depending on the effect you want and which trees are thriving and which trees need more space or sunlight. So yeah, it's been a really great project. It's in the design stage at the moment. It's going to planning, and it's due to be on site later this year, I think, isn't it, Adam?
Yeah, it is. And it's, for us, it's a, Andrée, you mentioned at the start, we've been working together for 20 years, and we were originally with the charity Groundworks. And this project we're co-creating with Andrée Anderson, who's the garden designer, BBC Gardens World presenter. So the 3 of us have been working together on this project now for the last couple of years. And Andrée is a brilliant communicator. That's, one of her USPs. And this project is very much about creating this microforest, but is sharing best practice, communicating and inspiring other schools and other education establishments to think about their outdoor spaces, not just as a traditional playground, which is kind of the default, but into an outdoor classroom where children can experience ecology, biodiversity, climate resilient planting. And it aligns perfectly with the natural history GCSE that they will have this amazing classroom outdoors with swales that are picking up water. It's really interesting with bespoke furniture, creating these micro habitats within this woodland. So yeah, we're really excited and can't wait to talk and share more about it as the project progresses.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Eric came to the conference, obviously, where we met as well, at the conference last year. So gosh, it sounds absolutely fantastic. And I just want to talk a little bit about actually climate resilience and things. I think, any program, any project, anything that we stick in the ground, everybody's worried about where's the water going to come from and all that kind of thing. And I understand. I mean, I understand a little bit about the Miyawaki method of like, forest planting, where you have this really sort of intense, close, dense farm planting because you don't need so much water, I think, as how I understand it. Obviously, I'm not a landscape architect, so. But do you have any top tips if someone's listening, regarding climate resilience at all?
Well, I mean, for us, climate resilient design means working with nature. I think that's the kind of the party line. And for us, it's permeable surfaces, care for the soil. There's a brilliant book that Tom Massey's written called The Resilient Garden. There is the one by Marion Boswell, The Sustainable Garden. Both really focus on soil, which is incredibly important. Harvesting rainwater and selecting plants that thrive in changing conditions. And a really good example, if anybody's in Cambridgeshire or Peterborough area, we've worked with the Neen Park Trust there for 15 years now and designed lots of different nature gardens and play areas within the country park there. And Badger Nature Play that we created there has got these playful swales. So water, when it's really heavy, collects in the swales, they fill up. There's little bridges and stepping stones across. So that playfulness will be in every Davies White project, no matter where it is. They can hop across and climb across. And then the planting is suitable for that. So we've got the willow, and we were back there last week, and it's quite amazing to see how some of our planting has really thrived in the conditions that you think it maybe wouldn't. So to create these resilient spaces that are fun, beautiful, and educational is really what we would set as the sort of bar for our projects.
I love that. I love that. And I used to live near the Neen Park thing, so that was before. I'm going to have to go back and have a look because that sounds lovely. And
Andrée designed this circle of trees that leaned in, and there were these wooden benches inside. So it was like a story circle. And that was, I think we said it was about 13 years ago. And we were there last week, and it looked fantastic, didn't it, Andrée? How it had all grown together.
Yeah, I think that's such an important thing actually that we haven't really talked about, this idea of time. We have this desire to do things quickly. We work with financial cycles and we are commissioned to do things to a program. And I think working with nature, you have to slightly readjust to nature's time. I think that's good for us. But you can't rush nature. And there's a wonderful saying, isn't there? You can't rush nature, but everything gets done. And we try and, I mean, I know I do when I'm designing things. We've got to imagine what this space is not like just when we've finished building it, what it's like in 3 years, 5 years, 50 years. And because we've been together now working for 20 years, Adam and I are starting to see some of our projects that we did 20 years ago, starting to be the things we always imagined. So that's quite a lovely thing to be able to go back and see how these things develop over time. And what's interesting is the things that do well in the long term are plants. They establish, they get better, they offer all of these, wonderful resources that we know. Things that we build, they start to deteriorate the minute they are in the ground. If we're building with timber, it's got a lifespan. Metals, any other materials, they need a lot of care and attention to keep them from deteriorating. But plants and living environments get better and better and better. And we've seen that recently with our project at Neen Park. So it's so rewarding to go back and see what's happening 10 or 20 years later when you're working with the landscape and thinking about nature and nature's time. Yeah.
So I've just realised what the top tip is. The top tip is get the infrastructure of the garden or the landscape right. So that's your circulation through, that's your quiet areas, that's your social areas. Get the layout right. the stuff you put in. Imagine it's architecture. Get the building right. You can refurnish that house. You can redecorate a number of times, and we all have done. But if you get the infrastructure right, you can then replace things as years go. And you go back to any of our projects stretching back over the past 2 decades, that then clients do change bits, and they'll put in a crappy springy chicken, or they'll put stuff in. But actually, the movement of taking people through the space, the mass and the void of the space is the same. And that's the infrastructure. And I think if you want a resilient design, that's what you need to get right. And then have a layer of planting. And in our case, it's playful planting. And our new website, davieswhite.co.uk, we're creating, there's a new section on it called Field Notes. And it's going to be a learning hub. So it's not just showcasing our work, it's us sharing our top tips that hopefully will inspire young landscape architects, garden designers, or people at home that want to do something with their own green space.
I mean, just on that, actually, you sort of talk about getting an infrastructure right, and I absolutely love the fact that you're talking about nature and time. I think you're absolutely right. Even when I'm, talking to architects and other people, it's all a quick win, isn't it? We're always thinking we need to just make it look nice now, and then we leave it. Like housing development as well, same thing. We just need to get it all right, get the people in, and then just leave it, and then go on to the next one, rather than, thinking about what that, the longevity is going to be. And I like that. Would you say you can't rush nature, but everything gets done? And then you also mentioned deterioration, and that's springy chicken. I'm never going to look at one at a playground anymore without thinking. I'm going to hear your voice every time. That's springy chicken. But they bloody deteriorate. So let's put some.
I feel a bit mean with springy chickens. They do have, or springy anything. They have a certain play value. But my concern has always been, a local authority will put 3 in, a bit of rubber wet paw and a fence, and say they've provided a playground. Yeah. They can be used, and we have done springy acorns in one of our projects that are carved on this spring, but they need to be part of the wider design of the space, not just on their own. They're not a silver bullet for play on their own. And unfortunately, we see that all too often.
So how do you get involved? How do you get like the key stakeholders then involved? Because they all these like new builds, everything infrastructure, they're just thrown up, they're stuck in. How do you, what do you do? How are you doing this doing? Because you're obviously successful in this. You're obviously doing something right. I mean, the designs are amazing and people trust you. But how do you maybe you can give us an example maybe of, a process or something, and how you sort of got this in?
So we've got a standout collaboration we've been working on for the past year, and that's with Anglian Water. Yeah. And they've got a program called Enabling Water Smart Communities. And Andrée and I, along with Ara, along with a couple of other people, ran a workshop day over at Beth Chatto Gardens in Essex, where we brought together housing developers, funders, planners, designers for this workshop day to explore how we can create more resilient gardens and landscapes in new housing developments. And it was a really enlightening day. We started off, it was going to be a meeting, and then it was going to be a sort of an afternoon debate. And we ended up being symposium organizers. We started stepping on your toes because it became this thing, didn't it, Andrée? But it was a really enlightening day and a great location right next door to a case study project that shows what it does. I'll let Andrée explain a little bit more about it.
Yeah, we had some great speakers, didn't we, in the morning? And then in the afternoon, the reason we chose Beth Chatto Gardens as a venue, well, because they are fantastic and such a great group of people to work with, but also Julia Bolton, who is Beth Chatto's granddaughter, actually. There's a housing development that was being built next to the gardens, and the developer came to Julia and said, can we call it Chatto Wood? Because of the name, the name has some obviously profile. And Julia agreed, but on the understanding that they would do the planting. So this is a housing development that was already built, fairly traditional, with a road infrastructure and these kind of narrow strips of grass that you see everywhere on new housing estates. So Julia and her team worked with the developer to reimagine what these grass spaces and public spaces on this housing estate, as well as the private gardens, actually, what they might look like. Now, Beth Chatto Gardens have got possibly the best experience of planting resilient plantings. So Beth Chatto herself, I can't remember when it was done, but there was a car park in the gardens. She took up the car park and planted it with climate resilient plants. And it's because it's in Essex, which is one of the driest counties in the country. So she was experimenting with this a long time ago. So they've got a lot of experience about the planting mixes that will survive in very dry conditions. So they worked with this developer and they said, okay, we will plant all of these small spaces on the edge of the roads, next to the parking spaces, some of the front gardens in front of the new buildings. And as part of this symposium that Adam and I organised, we took all of the developers onto Chatto Wood to have a look at what they've been doing there. It's about 2 years old now. And there are some incredible stories from it, because as we were walking around, the planting, you could hear it kind of humming with insects.
Wow.
And Julia and her team were telling us that they've measured the amount of biodiversity in that housing estate compared to the one next door. So there's another one next door where this approach has not been adopted. So they've got these kind of, it's like a sort of wonderful experiment in practically, let's do it and see what happens. And of course, as we know, if we plant nectar-rich plants that are good for wildlife, insects, they come. And we noticed as we were walking around that there were swallow and house martin nests in the eaves of these brand new buildings. And we were having a conversation about, how incredible this was, how quickly they had come in. And they were saying, the planting attracts the insects, that attracts insect feeding swallows and house martins. So it can be done. It doesn't need to be complicated. We don't need to rethink everything, but we need to have the will to make changes that are good for nature and good for us. So that's a great example of that.
And it just reminded me of a project we completed in 2009 in a pocket park in London. And Cape Space, the Commission of Architecture and Built Environment, did an assessment on this playful landscape we created, this pocket park. The play value went up. It was an awful playground before, and it obviously shot up. But biodiversity value shot up. They had the stats to show it. But the property value around that pocket park went up. Now, normally, traditionally, a play space or a playful garden near a house, people want children to have somewhere, but they don't want it outside their house. This did the reverse. It was quite an amazing thing. And these anecdotes came out, lots of similar ones came out in the workshop day. And one idea that was started to be explored was the idea of a resilient garden and landscape accreditation scheme. So if your listeners think of the energy rating when you're buying a house, you look at it and you might go, all right, that's got good energy rating. Could we apply the same to gardens and landscapes with new developments or even established ones? So actually the property value would probably go up. So you're not getting a load of builder's rubble with some turf chucked on top and so there's your garden. You're actually inheriting this wonderful piece of ecology on your doorstep, the countryside on your doorstep. So it'd be fantastic to explore this. And we've been talking to the RHS and to other people about exploring this idea of this accreditation scheme. And I think it would be a really good, tangible outcome from this workshop day, along with lots of the other ideas that were discussed. And we're working with some other housing developers now, and we're working with an organisation called Urban and Civic, aren't we, Andrée? And it's kind of, I think it is changing. There are some good developers out there that really do want to listen and make a difference. And I think they kind of get a bad shtick quite often, but they're not all. Some of them are really embracing this landscape-led approach. And the Landscape Institute that I was president of are running a conference in Birmingham coming up, their annual conference all around landscape-led housing, which is so important now with so much housing being built.
Wow, that's brilliant to hear, actually. So doing it that way up rather than the other way.
Yeah.
Like that landscape-led approach. Really love that. And it's true. I mean, the economics of biophilic design that Terrapin Bright Green published, they talk about when you introduce biophilic design, when you introduce nature, it does put the price up. It puts the price up of communities, and you've just proven it. You're just saying there. So I absolutely love that idea to have, what did you call it? Resilient garden, like an accreditation.
Yeah,
Accreditation.
resilient garden and landscape accreditation. We even on this workshop day, we got the delegates to design the logo. They had a go. If you go to davieswhite.co.uk, that case study project's on there, and you can see some of the logos that it's so interesting that we'll work in schools a lot. But if you work with adults as well and you get them doing model making, and we've done this, or designing logos, they
Yeah.
get quite precious and are quite proud and want to stand up and talk about it. And if you're making models, they'll go, "Excuse me, have you got any more plasticine, please?" And can I take it home with me to show my family?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
finding that inner child in everybody and applying it not just to designing a play space, it's designing any outdoor space or any design, I suppose, is have a bit of fun with it.
Yeah.
Make it joyful.
Absolutely. I love it. And at the conference, we're going to have a couple of activations. So we might need to have a bit of a chat to see how we can.
Yeah, we should do our leaf printing exercise. That's really good fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
We should definitely do that. So, I mean, these projects are, really successful because they've already increased value and stuff. Is there anything else that you might like to add at all to all of this before I ask you the final question?
Well, I mean, I think there's the cornerstone of what Andre and I do. There's some really good books if your listeners haven't got them on their bookshelves. One is The Nature Fix by Florence Williams, and she explores, can nature make us happier, healthier, and more creative? And a few years ago, we got to know her and meet her, and it's quite fascinating. She traveled the world collecting the science and the anecdotal evidence. And then the other book is Richard Louve's Last Child in the Woods, and he talks about nature deficit disorder. And I think if you're involved in design or you're trying to make a difference, this research is really useful. And then for Andre and I, a real landmark in our career was being asked to co-create and design the RHS Back to Nature Garden with Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales, who would make a brilliant landscape architect. She was really engaged in the whole process. And that project really did help spark curiosity, respect for nature, and explore lasting childhood memories, especially for early years. So those projects or those books are really worth taking a look at and using them as best practice.
Wow, fantastic.
You probably, I was just going to say, Vanessa, from this conversation, you can tell how Adam is so good. He can remember dates, facts, statistics, and I was a bit kind of hazier about those things. But I think why we've been successful for 20 years is because we're very different. So as a partnership, I think if you both have similar skill sets, you're kind of replicating. Adam and I are completely different. So I am always tapping into the emotional side of what we do. I'm interested in how it makes people feel when you're outside. How do you help people change their understanding of nature? How do you excite them? How do you bring this sense of wonder, not just to children, but to everybody? And we spend so much of our time indoors looking at screens, measuring things, tick boxing, reporting on, feeding back about. And I also think it's really important that we get outside. We don't do, we be. We just absorb where we live, look at nature, and do all of the things that can't be measured. And you can't put a price on all of those things that make us feel better as human beings and make us feel connected to this incredible planet we live on.
I think what's really lovely and worth mentioning is this isn't a new thing. People talk to me about biophilic design and this, what you do is really popular now. Florence Williams in 1859 said that patients recovered twice as fast if they had fresh air, daylight, views of nature. Modern research is showing us that it can make us happier, healthier, and more creative. But it's been around for a long time. And Roger Ulrich in the early 80s said to his wife, the reason why I take the long drive home from the office is I drive down the streets that are covered with trees. And he didn't know why. I mean, it's only when he considered it. And he said, I'm a lot happier when I get home and I've done that slightly longer journey. And I always think that's probably the reason why, if you're in a doctor's waiting room or a surgery, there'll be a picture of a leaf or a landscape on the wall, because it does bring your heart rate down. And for Andrée and I, because we do a lot of work with young people and children, we love this quote, which is, we don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing. And I think if there's one thing everybody can do, is try and find their inner child and try and make their day a little bit more joyful.
I really love that. I really love that. So, final question that I ask everybody. But before I do, hang on, I'm just going to say, just as a reminder for people to go to the Biophilic Design Conference.com website, get your tickets while they're still cheap. And we're running that as a not-for-profit. So all the money's literally going in to pay for the venue. So yeah, it's we're doing it for everybody. So hopefully it'll be lovely to see everybody again. And we did the last one at the Barbican, this one's at the Westminster in London. This is about how we bring about change. So really excited to have you both at that conference. So again, biophilicdesignconference.com, and just go to the Journal of Biophilic Design website as well. You can find it there.
It was brilliant last year. We really, really enjoyed the pace of it, the topics, the experts, the conversations after it, and the breakout conversations. Yeah, we're a massive supporter of it, and would encourage everybody to get online. What was that website again, Vanessa?
Oh, bless you. Biophilic.com.
There you go.
I didn't pay him, honestly. Oh, that was great. It'd be lovely to see everybody there. It's a beautiful, it was a beautiful, beautiful day. And it's the 17th of November this year. So final question then that I ask everybody who comes on the podcast. If you could paint the world with a magic brush of biophilia, what would it look like?
For me, it would be picking up on some of the things we've had through this conversation, schools. Wouldn't it be incredible if every school ground was a nature garden that was full of trees and plants and wildlife and a beautiful environment for children to learn in? Then that would be one of the things that I can dream of, and maybe one day I will come true.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Andrée. And obviously, we're very different people and different creatives, but our values are absolutely aligned. And when I first met Andrée, I was like, I could work with this person. She's so talented as a designer, and we share the same passion for creating these spaces that are really different and connect everybody with nature. And I think, along with schools, I would love to see our hospitals and hospices. I think they're so important. The Maggie centres, for those going through the battle of cancer, are brilliant, and they show what's possible. If you ever get the opportunity, any of your listeners get the opportunity to go to them, and they're all over the country now, they just show what's possible. And the heart rate comes down, and people sit in it and find a little bit of peace and solitude. And I don't understand why that is not the norm for all new hospitals, for all new. We shouldn't be fighting. It should be not a nice to have, it should be a must have. So I think, we'll carry on championing it. You're championing it. And I know there's lots of people out there, and we cannot continue to be shade-loving species as creatives. We need to be sun-loving. We need to get out there and shout and bang our drum and make sure the decision makers and funders and policy makers are listening. And I think there's a real movement, and this next generation that have studied natural history, that come through, that come into the landscape profession, are going to be the superheroes of tomorrow. So I'm incredibly optimistic, and the joined up voice is there now. So fingers crossed, and we'll carry on as long as we can creating our nature play spaces. And you can see them all at daviswhite.co.uk, or find us online on Instagram at Davis_White. I'm the son of a market trader. Come on.
Thank you for listening to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast.